Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Tim McDonald is an author, healthcare advocate, speaker, and community builder who turned his stage 4 colorectal cancer diagnosis into a mission for change. He translates patient experience into meaningful action for researchers, policymakers, and healthcare organizations through leadership roles with Fight Colorectal Cancer, Man Up to Cancer, HOPA, and the PAN Foundation. Now, host of Advocacy at Work, Tim uses storytelling and advocacy to raise awareness and drive impact. He is the author of the brand new book, From Patient to Advocate. Well, Tim, welcome. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you.
I'm curious about your story, your journey, your book about advocacy. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I think usually the best point is kind of right at the beginning of my diagnosis, and how I handled that. And then, what I've learned through that process and journey, because it relates backwards to a lot of other stuff that happened in my life, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Yeah. So it was November 2020 when we were all facing the pandemic. It was a global thing. So we all were kind of in the same boat. One of the first times, I think, in history that's happened, at least in modern history. Everybody's still unique, but, we all could at least relate to what was happening. And my wife and I were making the best of it, having some fun, virtual Zoom parties with our friends and hiring our musician that played at the local sushi place across the street to come in and do all that, doing a little bit of weekend trips at Airbnbs where we didn't have to meet the host. It was all like, giving you 24 hours between guests, so they could sanitize it and everything. And then in November, right around on Thanksgiving, actually, I started having this pain in my right side and told my wife about it. And she encouraged me to go to the urgent care, which is right in our neighborhood. And just being the man that I was, I said, no, I'll just wait and see how I feel on Monday. And if I'm still feeling bad, I'll go. Each day it got worse. She kept asking me, go, go, go. And I said, no. And then Sunday morning she woke up and I said, I made an appointment. I'm going to be going over there. And I went over. They didn't know what it was, but they ordered a CT scan for me to get on Monday morning. I went on Monday morning and all they told me when I got the CT scan was, we should have the results in a couple hours, but don't call us. Whoever ordered the CT scan for you will have your results and get in touch with you probably this afternoon. So we were just waiting, having some fun at home. And I got a call from the urgent care asking if I could come in. And I just remember joking with my wife as I was walking out the door, because I could literally walk to the urgent care. I just said, well, I guess it's not going to be as simple as I'm calling in a prescription for me. Otherwise, they probably just would have told me over the phone. And then I got there and I figured something was up, because we all know when we go to doctors, you got to check in, fill out your forms, wait for them to call you back. They just said, oh, Mr. McDonald. And I said, yes. And they're like, come on back, put me right in a room. And about 5 seconds later, the doctor came in with one piece of paper in his hand and said, you have cancer. And I just remember that. And why I'm telling this is because he thought something was wrong with me by the way I reacted to it. I was just so calm, just like we're kind of talking now. And everything he was telling me was like, about all this stuff that happened, where it was in my liver, in my colon, almost blocking my colon, lots of spots in my liver. And all I said to him was, okay, what should I do next? And he was just like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And he kept asking questions like, do we need to call your wife to come over and get you and walk you home and or anything like that? And I'm like, no. And then finally I just told him, I'm like, why are you asking me all these questions? I'm like, he goes, because you're not acting how I would expect most people to ask if I told them they had cancer. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. He goes, yeah. And I said, if I acted any differently, would it change what you just told me? And he said, no. And I said, so why should I act any differently than I am before I walked in here? And he goes, well, you got a good point. You're just not like most other people that I deal with. So that was kind of the start of it. The one thing that I was worried about was telling my wife because I knew she was going to be devastated. Got home, told her she was devastated, but we had work to do, which was get to the GI doctor to get a colonoscopy scheduled. And my urgent care doctor actually called in a personal favor with a surgeon that he worked with in the ER and got me in that same day to go see the GI surgeon. So we needed to go. We drove down, went in, and you needed 3 days back then before you got a procedure done because you needed to get a negative COVID test, and it was 48 hours at that time. So got that. 3 days later, I got the colonoscopy. My sister had flown out here to be with my wife and me for a few days during that time. All this was very new to me. I didn't know what like metastasis was. I had heard of the 4 stages of cancer, but I never knew what they were. My sister had a little bit of knowledge of it. So she was kind of filling me in that like anybody who's stage 4 basically has metastasis, meaning it spread to a different part of your body, and things like that. And then I quickly, like, we were just trying to figure out how I got into an oncologist, or back in those days, I was like wondering why I just couldn't talk to a liver surgeon to have him cut the cancer out of my liver. I just thought in simple terms back then. Now I know a lot more, so I don't do that. But needless to say, I progressed with my cancer treatment very well. I knew that was going to happen. A lot of people, they say, have what in the cancer world say they have scanxiety, meaning you get anxiety around your scans coming up, which are typically at 3 months. They had put a stent in my colon when I had the colonoscopy. And after my first infusion, I had passed the stent naturally while I was going to the bathroom. It was not pleasant. Did not happen right away. It took me 45 minutes in the bathroom. But I did. And then I called my oncologist at the time to just be like, hey, is this okay? I thought something could be wrong. And he goes, no, it's very encouraging, actually, that probably means your tumor shrunk enough. And I'm like, great. So ever since that point in time, I just figured like I was going to have a good scan, that first scan. And that first scan was great. I mean, some of my tumors on my liver reduced by centimeters, not millimeters. And I was just like really thrilled with the progress I was seeing. And I just kept having good results, but I got involved in a couple advocacy groups, or not advocacy, but support groups, basically, early on in my treatment. The first one was a men's cancer group, and they were more about like the emotional support, which I didn't feel like I needed a whole lot of that, but it was just nice to connect with other men who had cancer and understand like some of the issues and, things that I wasn't hearing anywhere else, like about like I mean, just how
Just the details, the day-to-day life details you don't hear from people unless they're living with it.
well that, and plus I think hearing it only from guys as opposed to hearing it from women, it was different because I think we process things differently. And men, as a general rule, I don't think are as open as women are with their emotions, because we were always taught that growing up that we need to be strong in the sense of don't let people see you cry,
Right.
hold in your emotions, don't, it's all this that, most women are okay, expressing. And in this men's group, I started seeing guys do all the things that weren't a strong man, in society in our group. But if you saw them on Facebook or anywhere else, like in public, they were still the strong guys, And so it just opened my eyes up to just how much like this is needed for men facing cancer. But then I started like getting really interested because I wasn't taking the advice that most of my providers were telling me, which was I was going to be on chemo for life, not a surgical candidate. And I just didn't buy that. My story that I was telling myself and that I believed in strongly was that I was going to make it through this one way or another. And I believed in the modern medicine methods that we currently have. But I didn't believe that just because one doctor was telling me this, that that was going to be my story. And so I had asked the guy who was running the men's cancer group if there was another group for colorectal cancer patients that was more about treatments more than emotional support. And he told me about another group. I got in there. It was a little overwhelming, to be honest. It was. I mean, I'm very active with them now, but back in those days, they were in Facebook at the time, and it was like you became friends with all these people you didn't know. They invited you to all these different. They called them neighborhoods, but were Facebook groups. It was just like very strange to me. And then but I got in there and I started just figuring out, like, I didn't need all of that. I just needed what I needed. And that was people that had metastasis to their liver. And so I got in there, I started like looking around, and this was in February. So it was only like 4 months after I was diagnosed. And they had this thing that was like a match, are we a match? Kind of the Valentine's theme. And it talked about the condition of the cancer in your liver compared to the different treatment options. And I kept going through them and started thinking to myself, oh, what all these oncologists are telling me is right. I'm not a candidate for this. I'm not a candidate for this. I'm not a candidate for this. But then I got to a living donor liver transplant and I'm like, wait a minute. It looks like I might qualify for this. And so I started pursuing that path. And that's when I learned like the power of advocating for yourself, first step. And I remember I reached out to that surgeon. I got a Zoom consultation with him. Before I saw him, I made an appointment with my actual oncologist. I go to a major cancer center here in Tampa, an NCI accredited comprehensive cancer center. And I usually saw one of his PAs, typically, but I had asked the PA on my last appointment, I said, I have some things I want to discuss with my oncologist. Can I set my next appointment up with him? And they're like, absolutely. Anytime you want to, just let us know. We'll do it. So I went in, I told him, and I'll never forget when I told him I was going to be talking to a transplant surgeon for my liver. His first words out of his box were, that's outside the box. The only people I know that do that are Cleveland Clinic up in Cleveland that might do that, not that do that. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this isn't the way I'd want to be talking. If I was in his shoes, I wouldn't want to be talking to a patient this way, who says, hey, I'm bringing you something that I think is providing hope. And you're telling me like it's outside the box. But my initial thought in my head was, he doesn't know me too well because I am outside the box.
Right. Right.
In the way I live. But that just basically opened the door for me to have, I just wanted him to know what I was doing because I felt really strongly about like having a team. But I think that was the first point in my treatment that I realized and I know I'm going to use a sports analogy here of American football, but most people think like if you're the patient, you need to be the quarterback of your team. And I kind of say, I used to believe that, but after this whole experience, we're not the quarterback. We're not even the head coach. We're the general manager. We are deciding which people we want to put on the field and who's going to be calling the plays with us and give us the best odds of winning. And that's who I became in that moment, was the general manager of my own team, saying, we are going to make this happen. I want these people to come together. I want them to talk, do all this other stuff. So it was really that whole process. I didn't realize it in the moment, but I can look back and say that was the moment it happened now, that I really took control of my own path instead of waiting for experts to tell me what they could do for me. I was finding the right experts for my own personal situation and putting them together on my own team to give me the best shot at winning.
Excellent.
And needless to say, I ended up getting a living donor liver transplant almost 3 years ago. And I have an amazing, story about my donor too, that we could probably spend a whole hour on that in
I'll
itself.
bet.
But, really the thing that I really started, understanding after I got my transplant was because I feel like I handled my cancer diagnosis, treatment about as healthy as I could mentally, But once I got to a place where I had my transplant and I had kind of recovered physically from that, you know, anybody I think that has a second chance of life has some mental, issues that they need to deal with. But any cancer survivor also has, like in survivorship, mental issues that they need to deal with. And I think I am a big proponent of this in my groups now about especially for transplant recipients that are colorectal cancer patients, mental health should be part of the whole treatment process, just like getting your new liver. You should be treated for your mental health aspect of it too, because that was never offered to me. I actually had to pursue that once I got back home, and I did it.
Again, you have to advocate for yourself, right?
I advocated for myself again. And I did talk to a therapist for 9 months. I talked with a lot of other guys in my men's cancer group who were survivors about understanding this. I am not saying I'm perfect at this today. I feel like all of us, it's a process. It's not a destination. And, but I think I keep getting better and better at dealing with it because of the fact that as I get further into my survivorship and the more advocacy work I do, the more loss I experience. Colorectal cancer is the number 2 killer of all cancers, and it's the number 1 killer of people under the age of 50. And so in all these advocacy groups that are colorectal cancer, I get to meet some of the most amazing people that I've ever come in contact with, but I also lose a lot of
Right,
those people.
right.
And one thing that I've kind of learned and processed through all this is I used to carry that weight on my back, on my shoulder, you know, every time I lost somebody, I felt like I needed to carry them with me. And just in the last year, I have started to realize I can still carry them with me just in a very different way. I don't need to have the weight of them over my shoulders. I can actually take them and have them brighten the flame that lights my path forward. And that transformation, I know it sounds very simple, and it is very simple. It's not easy to do, but it's very simple. Has helped me understand this is how I honor them. This is how I never forget about them, is by doing this advocacy work, getting out there and telling their stories, sharing their stories with those who will listen, and knowing that together we are making an impact, but I'm not burdened by the weight of them on my shoulders anymore. And that is such, I mean, I dare to say it's just been a transformational in my survivorship, realizing that how I can do that. It's really been a major change. And I talk with a lot of other advocates or, people who are getting into advocacy, because one of the things that I never try and do is sugarcoat anything. I'm a firm believer, because my professional work is building online communities, right? So you bring people together over a shared purpose to create a shared outcome. Very similar to what we do in these advocacy groups, right? But the one thing that I need to be careful about in these advocacy groups is, unlike these communities that I run, I firmly believe that you kind of need to make everything look like fun. If you tell people you want to, hey, come work with me, nobody wants to come work with you unless if they're getting compensated, right? But if you make it look like fun and you're having a great time, people want to be part of that. They want to experience that with you. And I do feel that way about advocacy in a sense, but I don't want to just highlight that aspect of it. There's another important side of this, which is, how emotional this work is, how mentally taxing this work is. and the loss that you experience during this. And so I do talk about this a lot, and I share this with a lot of other people who are going through this. I mean, I met this, I was in DC back in March for Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and we were calling on Congress. And I was talking with this 20-something-year-old who was diagnosed when she was in her teens. And she's no evidence of disease now, but you can imagine her friend network from colorectal cancer is mostly all young people. And she was fortunate to survive where a lot of those aren't. And she was just carrying their weight on her shoulders like I have never seen before, like I once was, really. And I just told her what I had just shared with you. I mean, she literally, as when we were done talking, just gave me a huge hug and thanked me for that, because I know it's not going to be just she got home and changed the way she thought about things, but I know at least the seed was planted for her to do her own work to try and help get there. And
Excellent.
that to me, just like that fills my heart and keeps me doing this work when I can share these lessons that I've learned with other people who are going through this, so that they don't have to take as long to figure it out as it took me to do it.
Yeah. As you're talking, I think about how bizarre it is in our culture that we make this loss thing so negative. And David White, the poet, Whyte, he talks about how half of all human experience is loss, because everything that begins in time ends in time. Every relationship we have ends. The very best marriages on this planet end in death, right?
Yes.
So what we do with our valuing of it or labeling it and interpreting it is everything about what we experience as a result of it.
Yeah. And I think I've come to learn too that, like, um, you know, death is about the people that are still here living, not about the person who died. I mean, I know I'm not trying to convince anybody that I'm right or, that I'm wrong or anything, but it is like, that's how I look at it, because, you know, I don't know what happens to me when I go. I don't think any of us know for sure, right? Until we're there.
But you have had the lived experience on this side of that transition, and you know what that can be like. And you have
Absolutely.
been here and you've lost people, and you know what you can do with your mind energy around that.
Absolutely. And my wife thinks that I have gotten numb to death. And it's not that at all. I still have emotions. I still cry. I still feel inside when I hear somebody's gone. But I also understand that, like, you know, the pain of losing them is because I got to know them. And that's a personal thing that I am going to miss, you know, having them in my life. But that doesn't mean that I can't take the memories, I can't take the lessons, and I can't take that friendship still with me. I just can't physically be in the same space as them anymore.
Yes. And what I talk to people about with this, and I have a process for grief and loss that I make available to people for free on the allthesame.info website on the educational materials page, is simply that if I can face that pain and fear and sadness and realize it's not going to kill me and keep my breath moving and let it move through me, then I can get access to all those wonderful life lessons. But
Yes.
if I refuse to accept the pain or think it's too much and shut it down, I'm also blocking myself from having access to those life lessons and joyful memories.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so true. And I really feel like, I mean, so much of that, like, particular aspect of that about, like, processing through something instead of just burying it is, like, I think appropriate to just every aspect of our life?
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing about it in this particular kind of case, when I'm ending a relationship or somebody dies, is that unless I block myself from access to those memories, that process, that relationship, even if it was difficult, has enriched my life and taught me lessons if I'm willing to learn them. However, if I'm busy trying to shut the pain off and I don't want to face it, I block myself from having access to those life lessons and I block myself from having access to the joyful memories as well.
Yes. I think, so much of what we experience in life are two sides of the same coin, right? And if we don't know one, we don't know the other. And I
When
remember
we try and
years
block out one, we block out the
yeah,
other.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I remember years ago, it was well before I was diagnosed. I just did this drawing that was talking about like a roller coaster, right? And one was a straight path, no hills, no inclines, no nothing. And that's how most people say they want to live life, right? And I'm not like suggesting that we all go out and like jump out of planes so we can feel comfortable living, having our feet on the ground, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, but I do think that when we start processing our grief, when we start processing our sadness, it helps us be more joyful. It helps us be more happy. And I want that in my life, you know? And so that's what I've learned through this whole thing is just how much like I can actually like appreciate all this stuff. And I know, you know, uh, I talked about like fear before I was diagnosed too. And talking about how fear is rational and irrational. And our irrational fear has such a job at masking itself as rational fear in our minds. But to your point about grieving and death is I came to understand that we cannot face our fears by burying our heads in the sand. We cannot face them by just looking at it the whole time. And we cannot face it by trying to avoid it. What we need to do is move through it. And when we move through it, we look back, and what was once this big, scary monster in front of us is now this like little shadow that we don't even recognize anymore. And to me, I think that's kind of like why when I was told I had cancer, why when I was told I didn't have any options, that I didn't feel like I was doomed, because there was nothing to be scared of at that point because those things weren't present right then. You know, I could work through what those words that I was just told, right? And I could see if there was something on the other side of that. And for me, there was a lot on that other side. And it's like it's so empowering, I think, really, to be able to recognize that, but not just recognize it, but put it into your daily practice and understand like just how much we have to live that I probably wasn't living before. And if cancer taught anything, I think it's that. I have so much life to live, but I need to do it now while I'm here because I never know when I'm going to go. And so
So,
just really just appreciating life, not being held back by fears and constraints and societal, conditioning. It's really understanding. And I mean, it is not easy either. I mean, to go deep inside yourself, to start asking yourself some really heavy questions about who you are and what your wants are, it's it's a really difficult thing, but it's one of the most rewarding things I think
right,
I've ever
exactly.
done.
So give us the title of your book that's just published.
Yeah, so it's From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact.
From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact.
Yes.
And was it just this past month that you released it?
Yeah, it came out on March 1st, so not that long ago, and it was really something that I had come up with the idea after several people asked me about, like, how I got involved in advocacy because I was starting to get invited to do, you know, a lot more conferences, advocacy conferences. I was asked to be on some research panels for research for uh, you know, potential cures for cancer or new treatments for cancers, or detection methods for cancers. I was getting to be on patient advisory boards for some organizations that are pretty, pretty substantial in both the professional and the patient space. And everybody's like, that I see at some of these conferences was like, how do you do this? How do you get involved? I want to do this. And
Excellent.
again, to my point of like being the one who makes it look fun, right? And they all want to be part of it. And I'm a firm believer that if somebody asks you the same thing 3 times, you should write it down, because then probably more people are going to ask you. And instead of having to spend 15 minutes telling each person the same thing that you just told them, you can just share a link with them and they can read about it. But I knew talking about advocacy was going to be much more than a blog post. It had to be a book. And so that's what prompted me to write a book, was really having, three, actually, it was probably double that. Probably about 6 people asked me the same question about how they could get more involved in doing advocacy work.
Excellent. And all of the stuff you were just talking about before, the idea of doing the deep dive inwardly and using this life event, even though we call it cancer, it's just another life event, using it as a learning or a strengthening process. I sent you a link earlier from the book by Sherry Ann Tom
Yes.
titled The Call of Cancer, A Loving Pathway to Wellness, Healing, and Transformation. And it's just one of the many good books out there from people who are not sitting off in some study hall theorizing about this. They're living they're living the life experience, learning the lessons, and then graciously passing them on to others.
Yes. I remember back when social media first came about, I was in a totally different industry. I was in real estate at the time, but it was right during the market crash of 2008, 2009. And I was part of Social Media Club, and their tagline was, if you get it, share it. And I think that tagline just embodied everything that I've always been about. And I've just adopted that kind of as my philosophy in life now. So I'm a firm believer, if I get something, it's my almost responsibility to share that with other people who are interested in learning it, so they don't have to go through all the pitfalls, all the roadblocks that I went through to get to where I'm at, because so many people had done that for me. And I just felt like I wanted to start doing that for other people.
Excellent. Excellent. It's quite a gift. It's quite a gift. Well, looking at the time, let me ask you to get centered and clear your mind and think about what we've talked about so far. Is there part of it you want to go back and highlight, or is there something we haven't even mentioned yet that you'd like to bring out in this interview?
Oh, I think that, kind of the thing that I really want to go back to is something that you just brought up about, like, being diagnosed is just another thing that happens to you in life, right? And I love that you brought that up, because I did talk with another guy who joined our men's cancer group, and I lead our chapter here in Florida for our men's cancer group. And he called me on the phone after he joined, and he was telling me he was a sheriff up in, Central Florida. His kids were just about ready to get out of the house. His wife and him had plans to go out and start traveling, retire from his job. And he just felt like he worked out all the time. He just felt like everything in his life was going to change. And I had just asked him, after listening to him for a few minutes, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, are you the same person you were when you were living with your parents compared to when you moved out? Are you the same person as you were before you got married to your wife as you are now? Are you the same person you were before you had your kids as you are now? And he said, no. And I said, so all this is just another experience that you're going through. You're going to be a different person because of it, but who you are as the core is still there. You're just learning from this lesson, just like you learned from all those other ones, to become a better human being. And I think, to me, that's like one of the most important lessons that I've learned through all this is, that none of this defines who we are. They just help form how we can become better human beings.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the time, for writing the book, and for being an advocate. And please appreciate, know how much I appreciate the work you've done and your continued success. It's entirely amazing and valuable.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that. It's truly a gift when I think other people acknowledge the impact that we're having.
Well, they do, and it's been fabulous, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Tim McDonald is an author, healthcare advocate, speaker, and community builder who turned his stage 4 colorectal cancer diagnosis into a mission for change. He translates patient experience into meaningful action for researchers, policymakers, and healthcare organizations through leadership roles with Fight Colorectal Cancer, Man Up to Cancer, HOPA, and the PAN Foundation. Now, host of Advocacy at Work, Tim uses storytelling and advocacy to raise awareness and drive impact. He is the author of the brand new book, From Patient to Advocate.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.